Welcome to Coming to Your Senses, where we talk about navigating the labyrinth of the mind and emerging victorious. Thank you for joining the conversation today. I'm joined by a fairly newish friend and colleague, Sharon Castle. And as ever, neither of us have prepared. Neither of us have got any idea where this conversation's going to go, which is one of the reasons why I love having these conversations. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to launch into that first question, which you probably, if you've listened to other podcast episodes by now, you'll know yourself. But let's just see where we go. I'm looking forward to this. So firstly, welcome, Sharon. Thank you for joining us today.
Hello, Jules. It's such an honor and a delight to be here with you today. Thank you for inviting me.
It's a pleasure. And as I say, I'm going to launch straight in with my first question, which is, can you start by sharing a time in your life where you've come to your senses, where you've had that kind of wake-up call in some way, shape or form, and what and where that led you to in your life?
It's quite a big question and so many things pop into my mind, but I would say that probably the biggest one happened about 28 years ago, and it was probably the biggest wake-up call, coming to my senses event that anyone could ever experience. And it really involved a traumatic experience. And, you know, I have reflected on it often enough to remind myself that as human beings, we wish it could be easier and we could have these situations where we don't have to go through hard lessons, harsh realities, big events, and really quite debilitating circumstances. But this isn't one of those. It is what was a big one, and it really shifted my life dramatically and woke me up to what I can now honestly say was the biggest change I've ever had to make in my life. And it did involve an accident. I was married previously. My husband and I, this husband, we've been married for 21 years and together for 28 years. But prior to that, in my previous marriage with my two young sons, we lived on a huge property. And on this particular day, it was my son's 17th birthday, and I gave him a little birthday party and invited a whole crowd of boys to come. So a crowd, there were probably about 8 of them, and they were all part of the first team rugby side. It was a Sunday. They were going to have a little party, and then we were going to drive them through to school for rugby practice on a Sunday because they were in the first team and they had some big matches to prepare for. And this particular day, we were just getting ready after we'd given the boys their lunch, and we were going to round them up to get ready to leave. And one of the youngsters ran into the house screaming and shouting, Auntie Sharon, come quickly. And there had been an accident. And my boys were very familiar with four-wheelers. They'd had four-wheelers for a large part of their lives. And my eldest son was turning 17. My youngest son at that stage was 13. And this youngster ran in and said, there's been an accident. You know, you immediately jump up and wonder if it's one of your children, and then realizing, golly, there's a whole bunch of boys. And running down my driveway, which was a very long driveway, to what was a vision that no parent would ever want to see. And that was 2 boys lying on the ground, unconscious, with a bike on its head and the wheel still spinning. And it felt to me like it took forever to get there because it was a very long driveway. But when I got there, I realized that there was something really severe that we were dealing with. And what had happened was this youngster had put a passenger on the back of the bike, and with no helmets, they'd broken some rules, and they tried to avoid a speed bump in the road, and he couldn't right the bike because it loses a lot of its ability to maneuver when there's a heavy person on the back. And so he drove straight into a tree, and literally the passenger behind, with the impact, they must have been speeding, he crashed into the tree and crushed the base of his skull. I couldn't see that at that stage, but the youngster was not breathing and he was lying over a drain pipe, and I tried to just get my foot underneath his neck. I had a little bit of CPR training and I knew not to move him, but he was completely extended and gasping for breath. I just wanted to lift his head, and as I did that, The blood came out of his nose and his ears, and I knew we were in trouble. And shortly after that, my husband at the time arrived, called an ambulance. We tried to get hold of his mother. No cell phones in those days. Couldn't get hold of her, and started to drive to the hospital. The local hospital was a government hospital, not one you want to be if you've been in an accident, not a high care. Anyway, as soon as we got there, we heard from the ambulance driver that they'd got hold of her, and we rerouted and went to a high care facility, and they put him on life support. Long story short, 3 days later, when he was not doing that well, actually the day after my son's actual birthday, the 16-year-old best friend died, and he had absolutely no more brain activity. And at the time, the counselor said to us, one of two things is going to happen. You're either going to grow close as a family, or it's going to split you apart. And I think the words split you apart were probably mild in comparison to what happened. It actually wrecked our lives completely. And we eventually got a divorce. About 18 months later, I left and we got a divorce. And so started this journey of just wanting to know why. And it was the biggest wake-up call I ever got, because I realized that everything that I'd been doing up until that point was really all about me. And nobody wants anything like this to happen. And I don't think it's anything that we could have caused, but it was a situation that woke all of us up. And I went on an odyssey. I wanted to know the truth. I wanted to know how come I dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's. I was this woman who had everything, the white picket fence, the successful husband, the boys at the good school, everything was just so perfect. And maybe there was a little bit of ego and almost arrogance about, being untouchable in a way, very, very involved in the church and so on. I could tell you dozens of stories, but to bring you back to the present day, the journey and the odyssey that I went on really took me to places, to information, to experiences that helped me to realize that I was being molded and I was being shaped into something that I didn't know what that was. But as life went on and as I evolved into this different human being than what I was there, I could see that there was something that had been given to me so that I could be relatable, so that I could tell people that it's never the end of the world. There's always hope. There's always something that's going to come out of an experience. I didn't know that at the time. I'd always been this person that was hugely dramatic. Everything was just so overwhelming. You had to go and make it happen. If it was to be, it was up to me. And I had to dig so deeply. And at the time that we got divorced, my husband, who's now passed away, at the time, he was in such a low place and under psychiatric care. My one son attempted suicide. The other one, I put him into boarding school. And when I left, the eldest son, whose friend had died, he got a scholarship to play rugby in the UK. And so I left under this idea of I was going to really fix myself because I was so broken. And I needed to do that because I had young sons who needed me. And I wasn't sure that their father was ever going to come out of this because he blamed himself. I blamed myself. My son blamed himself. Everybody blamed themselves. What I can tell you now for sure, Jules, is that experience has never left me, but I can speak about it now. And so when somebody comes to me and says, you don't understand, Sharon, it's been death, it's been divorce, it's been illness, it's been, misplacement, it's been attempted suicide, it's been so many things, I can honestly say to them, welcome. You're in good hands. I know what you're feeling. May I please help you? And so we go through these experiences thinking, that's going to be the defining thing that's going to destroy us. And then we come out years later, maybe not so long for everyone, but we do come out of it in a way that allows us, if we're willing to see that nothing was happening to me, It was happening for me, even through a death, even through the trauma, even through the unexpected almost annihilation of my life, because everything fell to pieces. And for 9 years, you couldn't even speak to me about it. Even although I was in the personal development world, there were things that I knew they didn't help. And it's only when I found the work of the principles that you and I know so well that I could see the light. And I finally started to see through the illusion that I'd made up that this was the end of the world or the worst thing that could happen, because everyone did what they needed to do. We all got on with life. Does it every now and again remind me of the pain? Yes. And then I realized that it doesn't have to be something that's going to take away my joy. It doesn't have to be something that has to be so defining of who I am that I can't experience an amazing life. And I really do. I really, really do. So that was probably the biggest one.
It's so fascinating, Sharon, that in all the time I've known you, which is fairly new, I didn't know that story. And what I find fascinating about that, it's a couple of things actually, is and I just find it so magical how this happens. I have literally this morning been editing one of the podcast episodes that will go out this week, I believe. So we are recording this at the beginning of June, and the episode I edited will go out at the end of this week. And in it, Johnny Cass, who is a long-term friend of mine, he says the phrase that he used, which I'd never heard before, but I think it is pertinent to this, which is never waste a good crisis. And
Wow.
I think that it is such, and like yourself, like myself, we've all experienced, and like Johnny, have experienced the depths of so many things, that I do think that they are pivotal moments of, I can keep going down with this, or I can start on that odyssey. And even if I don't know where that's going to lead me to, and I don't think there's one path that people need to look at where that's concerned. There's a word that you use, which I think is the key, which is reflection. Taking the time for reflection to then be able to go and the switch. And funnily enough, you used exactly the same phrase that Johnny did, which was, rather than life happening to me, it's happening for me. And therefore, what can I learn from that? What can I learn and grow from that? So that's one thing that I find fascinating, that we're recording this today, me having edited Johnny's episode this morning. And so his message is so prominent in my mind and connects to what you're saying. And then last week, I, as I think you know, I have a membership group, and every month the community chooses a theme. And the theme for June is forgiveness and letting go, how to move on from the past. They chose it, nothing to do with me. And the thing that I find fascinating, that the sort of beginning of the month was last week, and I shared my 90 minutes as to my view on this. And there's something that you said which really resonated with that, which is around the blame. So it wasn't this one incident that happened, terrible incident, and yet every single person that was there at that point blamed themselves. And how I find that so fascinating, that we as humans so quickly will take the blame in order to, in an attempt to be able to rectify something that we can't possibly rectify. And I would genuinely love to hear your thoughts from that experience and moving forward, how you have let go of that blame, and how you have moved on and created quite a phenomenal legacy, let's say.
Wow. Yeah, I love that question, Jules, because I think, you know, on that reflective part that I have managed to do, and, you know, doing the work that I do, that's, you know, possibly what I do every time I create something. There's this reflection that you have to go through. And there's always something new. There's always a new lesson that I've seen. There's always this possibility, this miraculous moment that emerges where I realize that at the time that it happened, and the blame, and the shame that I felt, and realizing that my family felt that too, was just something that had become such a habit. We had just been so conditioned to believe that we're always to blame. It's always our fault, and it was completely out of our control, really completely out of our control. And there were years where I would sit and think it could have been this and it could have been that. But I realize now that I was in a position, I was placed in a situation. We all had an event. It was an event. There's no helpful thought that can take away what happened. The only thing we can do is to decide to move on if we want to experience life in a different way. And it was never about, I want this amazing life or this legacy or, this magnificent situation to happen to me. It was always just like, how can I survive another day? How can I get through this next moment? And then you do, and the moments add up, and then you realize, wow, somehow everything has just worked out, and it always does, and nothing is permanent. Not the pain of it, not the joy of seeing through it. Everything is impermanent. And so just living in that sort of generous present moment by moment, seems to have been the thing that's really got me to the place where I could say to people, I hear where you're at. I feel where you're at. I respect and honor where you're at. And there's something more that I would love to let you know about. So can I tell you my experience of it? Because that's the best I've got. I'm always going to just give you the best that I've got and the best that I know how to do right now. And somehow that's what people hear. And then when you honor and acknowledge them for what they've been through, and I'll tell you why this is so uppermost in my mind, Jules. My community has been so severely impacted by a lot of traumatic events. And last week, this time, little did we know that the very next day, tomorrow will be Tuesday, last Tuesday, Africa had its very first tornado. And it literally was less than about 7 to 10 kilometers from my hometown. And it devastated the community. There's nothing left of them. And so they've got no homes, no clinics, no churches, no hospitals, no services, no facility, no water, no power. Watching this community go through this and realizing even through the extreme situation that they're going through, should they hear something of what we have to offer? And we know that it works because what we did 3 years ago was start a nonprofit called Wings of Hope. It's an outreach program that my company sponsors fully. And in our country, we don't get a lot of funding to help our community. But 3 years ago, when we started this project, we'd just been through 2 major floods, like major devastating floods. People lost their lives, their homes, their businesses. One, and then another couple of weeks, another one. And then a few weeks later, we went through violent looting, political violence, where we have to literally barricade our own community with razor wire, have our men stand guard with their own ammunition and guns, while the women stayed home, fed the children, and made food to feed them because they had to keep watch through the night. So, it's not like that one incident one time was, okay, done and now I can help people. It seems to be something that is happening all the time. And so once you've been through that and you realize your resiliency, the human capacity to endure and then still step out and say, how can I help? Even in the most practical ways, we're busy doing that right now as a community. There's been a huge call. We've done it before. The way Wings of Hope came about was because we helped first responders who were dealing with those floods 2 years ago. And now those same people, some of them have been turned into coaches through my coaching academy, Mindfit Coaching Academy. And so they are the ripple effect has started. So now they're there in the community, which was my dream, was to get people in the community down on the ground, working with their own people. And we'll still go in and help because we need to make more coaches. We need more people that can help. So I'm not sure if that answers what you were looking for, but that's the only thing I know.
It's taken a different route, and that's absolutely. It amazes me that something that significant can happen, and yet there's certainly not been anything over here on the news in relation to that. So I didn't know anything of that, and I think that what really strikes me is I think that we forget that wherever we are is wherever we're meant to be. And sometimes we have a choice. We might have chosen to move to that particular area. I didn't grow up in this area. I moved here. And yet I think that we are where we're meant to be, every single person. And that may be that we are in the lap of luxury, that we may be at the other end of the scale. And yet, especially with the work that we do, that there is a possibility of being able to help. I can't medically save somebody. I can't stitch a limb back on. I can't restart a heart. But I had a conversation with a prospect client a couple of days ago, and he messaged this morning to say, I can't believe how different I feel from that hour and a half talking with you. And he's going through possibly one of the lowest times of his life. And I think that I really hear what you're saying, that it's only when we've been through those severe moments for ourselves that we have an understanding of it. So I've shared on the podcast about my suicide attempts. I've shared on the podcast about my marriage breakdown and various other things that have happened. And I think that quite often someone could listen to someone sharing their story, like the one that you shared at the beginning, and think, I would not be able to cope with something like that. I can't imagine witnessing losing one of my children, or I can't imagine losing my husband or my partner or my wife, or I can't imagine that. And I get it. But I think the key thing that we forget is that it's not until that we're in that moment that we realize the resources that we do have. And I heard a quote years ago, and I apologize, I can't cite who said it, but the quote was, when you dig deep in your soul, you never come up empty-handed. And I think that's so true. And like when you're talking about it, you're talking about this community that has had, again, everything ripped away from them. And yet there are people straight in there going, right, what can we do? How can we help? And many of those people will not know what it is that they can do. But when they get there, it's like, oh, I can do that. I can do this. I can do that. But I think when we try to preempt it a lot of the time, I can't imagine what it would be like to be in that situation. We don't know. But when we get there, we discover those resources. And whether that is a local impact of natural disaster, whether that is losing somebody dear to us, whether that is divorce, whether that is violence. I have got other clients and colleagues and friends that are from South Africa. I cannot comprehend what it's like growing up and having to have the razor wire and all the different things. And some of the stories some of my friends, when they used to live there, tell me, I can't comprehend that because I've never lived in that. And yet so many of the stories tend to end up being, well, that's what you do. You just get on, and that's the way that it is at the moment. And I think that's the thing that really struck me, picking up on Johnny's phrase of never waste a good crisis, and listening to what you're saying and that moment by moment thing, I think that quite often one of the reasons why we have to have a disaster, quote unquote, either personally or globally, is for us to wake up into the present moment, which begs the question, if we all woke up and we all were in the present moment. I've genuinely never thought about this before, so this is a genuine question. But if we all woke up and we were all living in the present moment, could that mean that significant events would no longer happen? People would still die, there'd still be accidents, but maybe they wouldn't be as large, as abrupt. I don't know. What do you think?
Wow, it's pretty fascinating. The first thing that comes to mind in response, Jules, is we tend to, well, there's two parts. The first part is we kind of tend to make something big out of an event, and even although it is big, in our minds, we can make it even bigger. And the people that are involved in it are, they're in pain, they're in agony, they're in stress and anxiety, they're lacking in hope, but they're still doing what they know to do. So even through the dramatic event that's just taken place almost a week ago, I see what's going on. I see the community running. I see people doing practical things to help. And I see the people who need the help stepping up to help even more. So would it be, if we could all wake up, would it happen less? I'm not sure, because I think that's what life is going to give us always. And it's not that we can control it or that we even cause it, but that we need to be in it and be awake in it. And that's the waking up. It's not about the waking up and then being prepared better for us to navigate the situation, but waking up within the situation and realizing we have resilience, we have this human capacity, we're going to be okay, and temporarily forgetting that and then being reminded, or something happening to take that sort of out of our consciousness at that point, at that moment. So
I think that the key with what you've said there, that's sort of like solidified a little bit more what I was thinking, is that I think you're right. It's that the events will happen.
Yes.
But we will have the clarity to be able to deal with it in a far more logistical way without the added stuff.
Exactly.
Why is this happening to me? It's not fair. And, any kind of, when the stories all drop away,
yes,
we then just do what needs to be done without making it personal, without thinking it's because we're broken, without thinking that we have to fix ourselves.
Yes.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you for that insight, Sharon.
Thank you for the question.
Thank you for helping me see that.
I've never been asked. And I love the way that you sort of, connected all the dots there at the end. It does sound like that is the way that it's just going to work.
I love it. So, what do you think? What I'm struck by, and I've heard this in our conversations that we have as part of our group, and you've mentioned this a number of times about the volatility of what you've experienced in the communities that you've grown up in the area. And obviously knowing you and knowing how much compassion and kindness and love that you exude, as well as that you want to share. How does that work? If there's that volatility going on, how does that work on a day to day? And not just from a practical perspective of the businesses that you run and the foundations that you support, but just with going and getting your groceries or you're interacting with family. How do you navigate the volatility and your compassion and kindness?
The truth is, I feel completely okay and safe. When something major goes on, then obviously your senses are heightened, and then you're wondering, what's going to happen, how it's going to happen, when it's going to happen. I think you come through all of the sort of past experiences, especially being, who I am in this country, definitely privileged, definitely able to feel safer in our own little communities. And what I know for sure is now having to work in those other communities, all of the people that I interact with there pretty much feel the same. We've just set our lives up in a way where we are secure and we are protected to a certain degree. And then there's the other side of it, just knowing that what is meant to happen will happen. Now, I don't think is a defeatist attitude or a negative attitude. I think it's just the reality is because we're not in control. We are where we are. And you said something earlier that, don't waste a good crisis, bloom where you plant it, So you do what you know to do. And I see even, all of the communities that we work with, they do exactly the same. So on a day-to-day basis, it's just something that's completely natural for us to be a little more vigilant than most, but with not that kind of vigilance that puts you into a state of stress or anxiety. And I think that, and I'm going to add a little piece. You didn't ask me about this, but it feels so appropriate to add it because, we have a hero. Nelson Mandela was an amazing human being and a humanitarian. And he was incarcerated for 27 years. And he came out of that. He could have come out waging war, but he came out waging peace, love, forgiveness. And so we don't have any excuse as to why we shouldn't be perpetuating the very legacy that he stood for. No matter how it all started and where it is now, there is the possibility. It is definitely, absolutely figure-outable in a way. We can get through this, and we're not in control of the future, but we must do the best that we know how to do in the moment. And I feel like people are really waking up to that idea, is that it doesn't matter what the past gave you. It was shaping you and molding you and pointing you towards something, and where you are is exactly where you need to be so that you can be interconnected to everything around you and you can make a difference. And then all boats will rise with the tide. And so you just do what you do. And again, it's this moment by moment, being in the present and saying, what do I do now? And then, of course, we forget. And then we have to be reminded again. It's a constant. So you talk about the day to day. I think on certain days it's easier than others. But isn't that how everybody experiences life? There's certain days where it seems a little more difficult, or that the violence is closer, or the event is happening right in your community. But doesn't everyone have that? So it's just really getting to know who you are and loving where you are and saying, even through the depths and the extreme of every situation, there is something within me that is so strong and resilient that I'm going to be okay. And my goodness, I just have to look a little outside of my own small community to the communities that I serve and that I work with and see, what we call gogos, grandmothers, looking after families with no complaint, almost with an iron fist. We're going to be okay. And you've got, and I love them and I admire them. So I don't have a right to say this is incredibly difficult to deal with, because there are people that are dealing with so much more. And I'm not a martyr by any stretch of the imagination. I like what I love and I enjoy all the comforts that I do have. But I also know that I have this ability to empower other people around me, should they be willing to hear, just from the experiences that I've had. So it tells me where you've been, what you've experienced is absolutely everything that you need in order to be able to sit with a human being and honor them by listening, just being present with them so that they are felt heard and they are felt seen. And really, isn't that what we're all looking for? It doesn't matter what the experience. And doing the work we do, we get people that come to us that have got everything and are really struggling and suffering. You don't have to have an event. We don't have to have chaos to struggle. So the power
The amount
is
of times, especially this year, that I've had clients come to me and they're like, this is ridiculous. On paper, I have everything that people are striving for, I have. And yet, ... fill in the blank, whatever it is that comes for them. And I think that's so important to remind ourselves of, that it's not about class. It's not about what you have in the bank account. It's not about how you look. It's very much about how you are perceiving yourself in relation to the world. And there's something that you said there a moment ago that I'd love you to share with people, which is, for anyone who's listening to this, when you're talking about that resilience, if there's anyone listening to this that is either in an event, or they are they're struggling in whatever way they perceive it, they're suffering, how would you guide them, advise them, or point them to their own natural resilience, which you and I both have got plenty of stories that we can tell, both personally and from clients and family and friends, I'm sure, of where we've seen that. But for somebody who doesn't know it, how would you invite them to or point to them how they can find it?
Jules, immediately I think of the hard fact that they're there speaking about it, that they have actually endured so much, and here they are, upright, hopefully, and seeing something. To me, just number one, that in of itself shows human resilience, the capacity to be okay with whatever shows up. It shows that. But in the moment that you're in it, when you are sitting with yourself in the depths of despair, in the darkness of the situation, is to possibly do something that sounds so counterintuitive, but which is what I know to do, is to literally sit with it, in a way that says, if this is what's happening right now, and there's not much I can do about it externally, what have I got? Well, you've always got this internal innate well-being. And if you've never had an opportunity to speak about it, you can just sit with it and look and see how far you've come. But this is what we do. We don't see that. We see right now, in this moment, it should be better, or it could have been better had I. Again, the guilt that comes up. But no, you're where you needed to be. You were in the past and you are now. And that means that there's so much hope for you in the future, because you've actually had to endure this and you have shown up, and now you get to talk about it, which means there's something in you that wants to know. And so pointing them to that, knowing that I don't have to do the heavy lifting. I'm not the one that placed it there. It's there already. I'm just really, my attempt is to open them up to the fact that it's there. And should they even have a tiny little glimpse of it, if something shifts ever so slightly in them, now I've got a way in. And so have they. Because even through all of this last week on Tuesday, it was devastating to know what went on in this community. And there were tears. We all had tears. We all wondered why, again and again, how come this community gets impacted? But whatever it is that's happening, I see the community pull together. And that in and of itself makes those people that are in the middle of that dreadful event, the next time they'll have more resilience. Now, I'm not sure why they have to keep going through it, and I have no answer for that. I wish I did. But they do, and we all do. And just the knowing of it, even in the smallest, slightest way, will give rise to more. And I can't even describe that. None of us can. There is this beautiful intelligence that is just breathing us. And once you just get a little taste of that divine way of being, and everyone can, there's nobody that can't, even if you just help them to see the smallest part of it, it's that tiny little glimmer of hope, the light that you can let in. And I've seen people shift and change in the smallest way. I'll give you a story. We were in a community, and I could literally see no one was getting it. Blank faces, no one's there. And I literally said to my partner, we have to stop this. The co-founder of Wings of Hope, we have to stop. We have to shift the gears. We have to shift this energy. And we played music, Jules. And this community, South Africans, we know how to move and dance. Something that keeps us together. Because I said to them, these were first responders. I said to them, I can see that you are tired. I acknowledge them, that this is completely going over your head. You're overwhelmed, you're overworked, you're probably underpaid. There were policemen and psychologists and educators and the people that were really attempting to look after the community. And once we'd shifted the energy, rather than trying to tell them, we let them experience something different, and we opened the door with lightness and joy and music, the universal language. And once we could get in
there. My guess is as well, Sharon, that sorry to interrupt you, but my guess is that they may not have immediately leapt out of their chairs and started dancing.
Well, not at all.
But you spotted that low energy and you spotted that tiredness, and the music came on, and then at some point, even though they were tired, even though they didn't know a way through, I bet you they started moving, and therefore then that shows there's something else there.
There's life there. There's life there. And the turning point of that one event, a psychologist in the community stood up after we'd now delivered and chatted and interacted and cried and laughed and danced and did all those things. And she said to me, Sharon, are you telling me that everything I've ever done in my work of allowing people to talk about their past traumas, of wanting them to kind of dig in and see, why they didn't navigate their lives better, why their lives aren't better, has been a waste of my time? And I was in the front, in a big room with a lot of very tired first responders. And I said to her, is it working? And she said, hell no. And I said, I don't know.
There's the clue. It's so fascinating, isn't it? That it doesn't matter what it is. It's a simple, I talk a lot with people about self-criticism and self-doubt and all of those things. And they're like, yeah, but I've done it for years. And I'm like, well, is it working? Is it getting you where you want to? Do you feel how you want to? If the answer is yes, then crack on. But it's not. So something needs to change. It doesn't have to be the way that I live my life or what I believe. It's not about you believing what I believe. But it is about checking in with things that if they just genuinely aren't working, then that's not a helpful process. That's just not useful. And there's something in what you were saying. It reminded me of a story that a client shared with me years ago. Her and her sister had a very turbulent upbringing, and so much so that her younger sister was not in a great mental state, and had, from a very young age, was often talking about taking her own life, suicide. And one day, my client and the sister, they were going to do it. They were going to do it as a pact together. And they decided to do the whole thing with the tube in the car. And I can't remember their ages, but they certainly weren't older than mid-20s. I think that they were late teens-ish, mid to late teens. And obviously I knew it hadn't have worked because I was sat having a conversation with a woman who's older than myself. And I said, so what happened? And she said, I don't know, but something made me open the door. Something just is sparked within me and went, open the door and get out. And I said, that's what I want to talk about. What was that? What was that? I don't care whether you want to put a word to it as big as God, that's got many connotations, whether you want to call it divine, creator, life. I genuinely don't care what word you use. But to me, that's the little light that you were referring to. That's those glimmers of those little moments of just going, there's something there. And all of us have the opportunity to access that. Sometimes it is through big significant events. Sometimes it's little moments of intuition that say turn left instead of the usual right. But I think the more time that we can spend noticing them. And I want to go back to the word that you used right toward the beginning of this conversation, which is the reflection. That's when we have the opportunity to connect with it more, see it more, recognize it on a day-to-day basis. So what I would love to end this conversation with, because gosh, there's so many different angles and things that I want to talk about. But what I'd love to know from you, Sharon, is obviously you have been on such a significant journey through your life. And what I'd love to know is, are there any specific habits or practices that you have relied on or rely on now as a way of navigating life's chaos? So when literal tornadoes hit within your locality, is there anything that you always go to? Any practices or habits?
Jules, I wish I could say that there were, definite habits that I could put down on paper and give to people and say, you just do this and you're going to be okay. But I honestly have to tell you that in the moment that I feel like, wow, this is too much, getting quiet is the first thing I know to do. And sometimes that might involve, going on a walk. Literally, when I got to my office this morning, I sat in my car for 5 minutes because I haven't been well. I've had flu, and I've just finished 3 days of intensive training right over the weekend. So I'm tired, and I just know that there's something that I need to share. So I'm going to show up because I said I would, unless I wouldn't be able to, and I would let you know. So I know to get still. I know to get quiet. And if that means going on the walk, I work on a little farm. It's quite interesting. They have a few little retail stores here and a few offices. And my door is often open and the geese will walk in, or the turkeys, or the chickens, or the peacock. It's so lovely. And they literally come right in because they know there might be little treats that I keep for them. Nature is probably, if there's anything that I practice, it's just to get out and breathe. Look at nature, put my face to the sun, remind myself of the magnificence of what I am, which is nature. If it's a practice, I'm not sure. It's a spontaneous feeling to get still and quiet and kind of almost recalibrate. And the word I would use for that is marinate. I marinate in nature, just soaking it up, just like, okay, there's that life in me, that life force in me. And I'm still upright and I'm still talking. And, I'm going to be 66 really soon, but here I am. I'm just going to keep going. And until someone takes this baton, I guess I'm just going to keep doing it. And so for me, it's that reflective, wow, the miraculous idea of life. Having been through all of this, and here I am. Deep sense of gratitude.
It's funny how you started that with, I don't think I've got anything that I could put on paper as a habit or a practice. And then you went on to list all these wonderful, easily accessible for pretty much everybody, I would say, practices of taking a moment. I think often people will talk about stopping, but I don't think it's about stopping. I do think it's about pausing. And whether that is sitting in your car, or whether that is taking a moment on the sofa, whether that is going in the bath, whether that's going for a walk, it to me, I don't think you have to be prescriptive, but I think in the way that the world is being, I was going to say forced, but the way it seems to be moving at the moment is so fast of do, that it's like that. It's one of the reasons I chose the logo that I have for the podcast, which is this whirl of circles. It's the chaos, but in the middle is where we come to our senses. That's the pause. That's the slowing down moment. And I think that bathing in nature, marinating, what a wonderful phrase. I'm definitely stealing that. Marinating in nature, inviting it in literally into your office, I think is so beautiful. peacocks wandering into your office. That's so cool. Obviously, you get far more sun than we do, but I think that all of what you've said is accessible. I think that probably is what shows that as a woman in the environment that you're in, who has experienced what you've experienced, that is still happy to be doing what she's doing at 66 years of age, is pretty freaking phenomenal. I'm in awe of you and what you do. I love our conversations that we get to have. I'm extremely extremely grateful rather, that you have generously given time, even though you don't feel great. And obviously, as everyone can hear, I'm not exactly firing on all cylinders myself today. But I think there's so much in what you have shared, Sharon. I'm extremely grateful to know you. You may be a new friend into my world, but you're certainly one that I'm not going to let go of for some time. So thank you for gifting us your time and sharing your insights and moments of coming to your senses with our audience. So thank you.